Thank you very much for coming. I'm Jeff Kelly Lowenstein, a lecturer here at Columbia College, and it's really an honor to welcome Alfredo Corchado and Angela Kachurga here with us at Columbia. For me, I first had heard about Alfredo for a while, but I was very excited this spring when, as part of the work that we do with investigative reporters and editors for the annual conference, we've been trying each year to have a higher level of presence of Spanish language reporters, panels that have to do with Spanish language themes. And so this year when we were talking about it, the possibility came up that Alfredo might be able to join us. And fortunately that worked out. And one aspect that was really fun for me was we met, we started talking a little bit, we were drinking a little bit, getting to know each other, speaking a little bit in Spanish, a little bit in English. And so Alfredo said, well, Jeff, how did you learn to speak Spanish? So I explained that I had learned with my wife, who was here in 2007, I had learned to speak Spanish by watching the telenovela Destilando Amor. It was for a project I was doing with my brother, a journalism project, and Alfredo explained that's his mother's favorite novella. So with that bond, we knew we were in good shape. He did a fantastic job in the panel, and when he mentioned that he was coming to Chicago and going to be having a session at DePaul, I just thought, hey, this would be a fantastic opportunity to try and bring him to Columbia. So I'm just so thrilled it worked out with both Alfredo and Angela coming here. So Alfredo has reported for many newspapers for many years. I do hope that he's going to read from the book. I do hope you get the book. It's riveting, it's honest, and there's many themes about a country that matters so much, both here and on the other side of the border. And he writes a lot about growing up in those places. He writes about his own education. He writes about being a high school dropout. So I just think there's many different lessons to learn from that personal journey. And of course, he's covered many, many of the major stories of our time, won many awards, among them the Maria Morse Cabot, which is one of the highest awards for covering issues in Latin America. In 2009, he was a Neiman Fellow, so is just a tremendously decorated journalist and person. So please join me in welcoming Alfredo Corchado.
It's not just my mom's favorite telenovela, it's also mine. So we really, really bonded. Thank you, Columbia, and thank you, Jeff, Susie, for the kind introduction. And I want to do something different. I've been on the road now, I think, for 2 weeks, doing a bunch of book talks. And I thought today I would just read from the book and, more than anything, try to engage. I also want to introduce Angela Kachurga, who has deep roots in Chicago. And this is really, I mean, we've done a lot of, I guess, a lot of talks together throughout the country, but this is really special for us to be here in Chicago. I'll just tell you a quick story. I told La Gringa Novelera last night. She's our new friend here in Chicago. But when my first job was at the Wall Street Journal in Philadelphia, and I was completely homesick. I mean, always homesick. And in fact, I had my watch set on El Paso time. So I was looking at my watch, and then this is how much times haven't really changed that much, but. This is back in the mid-'80s or late '80s. President Reagan, IRCA, amnesty, and so forth. And then you had the whole Central American situation. And they asked me to come to cover Central Americans in the Midwest, in Wisconsin. And so I had to fly in through Chicago. And the first time I came to Chicago, I was just floored. I thought, I don't need Mexico anymore. I encontré el México de acá, the Mexico here. And since then, it's been this incredible affair. So when the opportunity came to come back to Chicago, see old friends like Teresa, Alejandro, this was a no-brainer. So thank you for bringing me. So what I'll do is I'll read maybe 3, 4 stories. Angela told me to keep it short, not read too much. And try to, more than anything, try to engage with you guys. So I will try to set up each story with a little bit of a backstory and history, and then we'll go from there. As Jeff was saying, I'm a high school dropout, and I say that not with a lot of pride, but it's a fact, you know. My family's from Durango, came at the age of 6, grew up in California, and I've always had this yearning, this dream that someday I would go back to Mexico. I think a lot of Mexicans who live in the U.S. or people from all nationalities, there's always this sense of nostalgia that you want to go home and somehow go home again. 1994, I got the opportunity to go to Mexico. And this was a time when journalism was going through its heyday. We at the Dallas Morning News had one correspondent at the time, and then suddenly it became 2. We ended up having 13 people, including the TV bureau that Angela led at the time. We had a Spanish version, Al Dia. We had translators. We had drivers. We had the largest bureau of any American paper. So we had people covering everything from narcos was one beat, the economics, the cultural story. I was covering U.S. policy to Latin America, i.e. mostly Mexico, some Central America, some Cuba, but mostly Mexico. And I didn't really worry or care that much about narcos. In fact, when I left El Paso, grew up in California, later moved to El Paso, but when I left El Paso, and I told my parents, my dream is to go back to Mexico. They couldn't believe it, like, why? We took you out of there. We sacrificed everything. We knew everything we loved to give you guys a better opportunity. Why would you want to go back? And I kept saying, because there's a lot of questions I had as a kid that I liked to find the answers to. But my father made me promise that I would never cover narcos, that I would never cover drug traffickers. At the time, we had a restaurant in El Paso called Freddy's Cafe, named after me. And one day, my mother is an incredible cook to this day. I mean, she's flat out, I think, the best cook. But we had this guy who was very obsessed with their cooking, with especially the huevos rancheros, the menudo, the caldo de res, etc. And he comes up to my dad and says, I would like to invest in your restaurant. First, he started talking about maybe $30,000, $50,000, $100,000, and so forth. It came up to about $300,000. And we didn't really know much about the dynamics about the border. I mean, we grew up in California. So I told my dad, I said, well, let's take the money, We'll open a bunch of restaurants along the U.S.-Mexico border. We'll call them Freddy's. Freddy's is my nickname. I'm the oldest of 9. And I said, we'll just open a bunch of restaurants, Freddy's Cafe, and so forth. My dad talks to the man and says, yeah, we're interested. And he says, well, there's only one problem, or just one thing you have to do. You can never tell authorities. You can never tell the cops that we're doing this, because otherwise you will have problems. And he named every kid, all of my brothers. He named the schools we were going to. And it was very clear that this was money laundering. My father said no. And he said, in those days, you can kind of say no to a narco, and they walk away. But when I left, he said, prométenos que nunca vas a cubrir el narcotráfico, el crimen organizado. No conocen la palabra perdón. They don't know the meaning of the word forgiveness. And I was thrilled. I said, yeah, I don't really care. I mean, I want to go to Mexico and write about its possibilities and write about the country that Mexico can be. I was, time I had been covering a lot of border stuff. I was there when Ciudad Juárez, when you saw the whole democratic movement in Ciudad Juárez, in Chihuahua. And I was really swept away by this possibility of Mexico. So I told the Morning News, I'm interested in covering the democratic process in Mexico, and maybe cover the immigration issues, issues that affected us as children. So, to make a long story short, trying to set it up, put in perspective, journalism crashes, as we all know. 2002, 2003, 2004, things started really kind of sliding. We went from the biggest bureau in the Americas to a bureau of one person. We shut down La Habana, we shut down Colombia, Germany. I think we had a bureau in Asia. And suddenly we are only one bureau. and that's Mexico City, and I'm the only correspondent. So suddenly I have no choice but to cover everything. And I say that because in 2000, after the presidential election of Vicente Fox, I had a choice. Do I want to go work in D.C. and cover the relationship between Fox and then the possibility that George W. Bush would be president? It was that idea that maybe D.C. makes a lot more sense than staying in Mexico. I left for D.C. and suddenly things 9/11 happened. The relationship just ended between Fox and Bush. So I asked to be transferred back to Mexico. Went to Mexico, and the paper said, can you also find out who's killing the women in Juarez? I go, okay. I said, they have a lot of faith in me. I'm a big investigative reporter. I'm sure I'll find out the answer. Obviously, I never did. But it gave me a sense of what was really happening in Mexico. In Mexico, there's a saying, I'm sure a lot of countries have it, querer tapar el sol con un dedo. You want to hide the truth with one finger. And I thought I could do that. I thought I could just continue reporting about other things, but not really about what was wrong in this country. I mean, it was almost like whether it was Fox, whether it was a PRI, whether it was a PAN, whoever it was in cover, they were trying to build a country on quicksand. There was no rule of law. There was no judicial institutions. So I started covering this. And suddenly, a group called the Zetas, a paramilitary group, came into the scene. A group in Tamaulipas. Our fascination, I think, really peaked when we realized that the Zetas, the headquarters for the Zetas, this is a group. Some of the members had been trained in the United States by elite forces, and now they were back in Mexico to work for the. I mean, they were under the army. When the leader of the Gulf cartel, one of the big cartels in Tamaulipas, reaches out to them and says, how much money are you making? He finds out, he says, I will triple that amount. Suddenly 35 members deserted the Zetas. I mean, they deserted the elite forces and became the Zetas. When we realized, the Dallas Morning News, that the headquarters was in Dallas, we really started going after that story. And began to cover how a young man about my age at the time, I mean, when he left Mexico, I think he was 7 or 8, suddenly becomes the leader of the Zetas. We're talking about Miguel Ángel Treviño Morales, known as El 40. And that really, I think, changed everything. To the point where when you start covering organized crime, you get signs that people are pissed off at you, that they're not happy, and you see, things that maybe make you think twice as a reporter. But it was in July of 2007 when a trusted U.S. source called me, and I think it was that phone call that changed my life. And I'll that's a long-winded introduction to the first few paragraphs of Chapter 1, 2007. I'm living in La Condesa. This is where our office is in Mexico City. And just to put a little more context, Angela was visiting at the time. Angela had lived in Mexico, was now back on the border. She was visiting. We were planning to go to Baja California to do a story about Americans going to Mexico illegally and living as illegal aliens in Baja California. I walked into the balcony of my 6th-floor apartment in my neighborhood of La Condesa and fixated on the thin sheets of rain falling on a late summer afternoon. In the center of a roundabout on the street below, theater students rehearsed their lines. A young valet parking cars for tips, dressed in a gray hooded pullover and tan jeans, struggled to light his cigarette. In the center, the actors moved gracefully around. A pale blue fountain that usually dry was now filling with rainwater. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of the steam whistle of El Camotero, the men selling roasted sugar sweet potatoes, pierced the wet air. Inside my apartment, the Eagles sang through the speakers, welcoming me to the Hotel California. It was part of a soundtrack that I had prepared for that trip. My girlfriend of more than a decade, Angela, and a friend were chatting over Malbec and tequila before we were to head out for dinner with some journalist colleagues. A tall vase of calla lilies sitting on a table between them reminded me of Diego Rivera's timeless frescoes of indigenous women gathering flowers into their arms. My cell phone vibrated in my jean pocket. I hesitated. It was bound to be work, but I did not want to miss a tip. I set my tequila down and flipped the phone open. It was July 2007, the last time I felt safe in Mexico. I recognized the low-pitched voice on the other end, a long-time trusted source, a U.S. investigator with informants inside some of the most brutal drug cartels in Mexico. I grabbed a pen and notepad and slipped into my bedroom. I closed the door. The skyline was still visible through the windows. It was dusk. I spoke a secret code name and joked, "Hey, ¿qué onda, güey? What's up?" He got to the point, "Where are you?" "In Mexico." "Where exactly?" "In my apartment." "Why?" "They plan to kill an American journalist within 24 hours. 3 names came up. I think it's you." I get out. "What? Who are they?" "I can't tell you more because I don't know more. But this may be serious. Set the business." And I'll pause there, but what we had done at the Morning News was we had just run a story on that weekend about a peace pact that the narcos were negotiating among themselves and with elements of members of the Mexican government. The story ran on the front page, but it was also picked up by Proceso and other Mexican publications. So suddenly it was a big story. And it also coincided with the award I had just won with Maria Morse Cabot from Columbia University, which meant I was doing a lot of interviews on radio and talking about Mexico and talking about the current drug war. So this is one reason why the U.S. investigator called me and told me, "Hey," in fact, one of the things he said was chill out. "Who are the other reporters?" I asked in disbelief. "Could be anyone, but I put my money on you. Just hide out." "What? ¿Dónde y por qué?" I was speaking in Spanglish, my natural language, furiously scribbling down my every word. "Let's talk tomorrow. I don't know enough yet." Wait, tomorrow may be too late." "Bro," he scolded me, "stop pissing him off. Lay off." He hung up. As usual, his calls were too brief. He was always afraid his phone could be tapped. My own cell phone almost dropped from my hand. The floor-to-ceiling windows that gave me a beautiful view of Mexico City skyline now left me exposed, feeling exposed. I looked out at the new 55-story Torre Mayor building beaming in the distance. Down below, 6 narrow streets converge. At the roundabout, Popocatépetl, 2 stray dogs joined the actors near the fountain and splashed in the falling rain. I had a fleeting urge to jump into the nearest closet to hide in the bathtub, but my feet wouldn't move. Had I been betrayed? And I'll leave it at that. So what happened next was I ended up spending a week in Mexico, much to the chagrin and against the advice of my editors. Because again, this was my lifelong dream, was to go back to Mexico. So I wanted the time to investigate the threat, to first find out how serious the threat was, the validity of it. And the second thing I wanted to do was find out whether there was a way for me to communicate with the drug traffickers, through the informants, through people I knew, through officials, and try to find out, what was it that ticked them off, and 2, try to make sure that they knew this wasn't personal. This was journalism, and I was just a reporter. I was trying to do a story. So I spent the week just talking to sources throughout Mexico. Angela and I traveled through Baja California. We kept to that trip. She later left for Texas. I stayed until it became clear that this was serious. And I think one of the things that Angela taught me was to learn to embrace the fear. And at the time, journalism was becoming more and more of a hazardous occupation in Mexico. Today, you may know more than 50, some people say more than 100 journalists have been killed or disappear. So I felt that as an American journalist, I had more of a responsibility to keep telling the stories. But obviously, when your life is on the line and you feel like they're going to get you, I ended up leaving, and I left Mexico. Ended up changing my routine. Ended up spending a lot more time in Ciudad Juarez, El Paso. At the time when Angela moved, the sense was that El Paso Juarez was much more of a safe place. And then obviously Juarez erupted in January of 2008. So by the end of by the end of 2008 or the summer of 2008, I had left the Dallas Morning News, and I had become a fellow. And I'll read you one part. By the fall of that year, I was a world away from the border and all the grief that hung over it. A crisp wind blew the leaves in slow motion outside the Walter Lippmann House, a stately white 3-story New England colonial that fellows of Harvard's Neiman's Fellowship call home. I had been accepted in the fellowship program in May 2008 and had moved to Cambridge in August. Angela and I talked all the time, but something wasn't right between us anymore. She called me from bed one night, the phone cradled to her ear. You wouldn't recognize Juarez anymore, she said. I could hear Zorro snoring pig-like at the feet of her door, of her bed. It's hard one minute to be at the scene of a mass murder, wondering if the killers will come back, and then the next to be back in the quiet street of El Paso. Angela was an age, distant and tired. The wit, the humor that would make me laugh so hard was gone. She had been at a crime scene that day, as she was most of those days. I've never seen so much blood, she said. I've never stood in so much blood. There was blood in my shoes today. I couldn't bear to wash it off. I tossed them in the trash. You did what? I asked, incredulous. Scouted in my tiny apartment, 2 blocks from the red brick building of the university, I was becoming American again. Relaxed, callous, self-absorbed, as if coated in Teflon. And now I'll read you the last reading. Oftentimes people ask me, what's the book about? And I always try to tell people it's not just about Narcos. I mean, Narcos is really the backdrop of the book, but it's really a family story, and it's the universal search for home. It's trying to figure out who you are, as a Mexican, as an American. And my mother and I have always had this long-standing debate of what could Mexico become, if only. I think my mother understands more than anybody why I wanted to go back, but she's always been very, very hard on me for that decision. We also continue to have barbecues in our home in El Paso, and this is one of the many contentious discussions. And by the way, one of the fun things about working on the book was taping my mother, and always, carrying a little tape recorder with me, and asking her questions and so forth. It was also neat to go back to Durango, where I was born, in San Luis de Cordero, and ask family friends, what was my mother like as a young woman? And they would say, your mother had the most beautiful voice. In fact, anytime she sang, even the roosters would stop to listen. And it's all on tape, and it was great. And I would tell my mom, I said, well, sing to me again. And I said, I just want to make sure that the story is correct, the story's true. So anytime I'm home, she will sing, and she will make menudo and huevos rancheros, and we do watch novelas, and that's a true story. My mother and I had many contentious discussions over the same subject, Mexico's future. I once asked, what would a Mexican government, truly of the people, by the people, and for the people look like? She was quiet for a moment, thinking, measuring her words carefully. Solo Dios sabe, she replied, looking straight ahead. Only God knows. Mama, Dios is too busy in the Middle East helping us hunt down Osama bin Laden. Too busy taking care of other problems, I said, needling her. We need to learn to hold government accountable as a people and not leave everything in God's hands. Do not underestimate God, my mother responded. Dios es grande. Do not underestimate the people, I retorted. My mother shot me a look that said, ay, mi Fredito, mi solecito, ya no eres tan mexicano. Oh, my little sunshine, now you are as naive as only an American can be. My mother, too, felt a painful pull. Decades in the United States had not changed her. She was Mexican, a woman of quiet dignity, integrity, and humility, with a deep faith in the Virgin of Guadalupe, the brown-skinned saint of Mexico, now worshipped in just about every corner of the United States and beyond. She never bothered to learn English. She spoke of her home, San Luis de Cordero, as her final resting place. She would return to her homeland one day, but would do so without her children. Mexico was her destiny, her burden, not ours. My mother loved her homeland, but did not trust the men who governed Mexico. The only thing I love more than our family, with all my heart, she said, is Mexico. Mexico es mi tierra, my homeland, my identity. But I won't let the government ruin my children like they are ruining my country. My mother liked to tell me, en México haces lo que puedes, no lo que quieres. La fe es lo único que tenemos. In Mexico, you do what you can, not what you want. There are always limitations. Faith is all we have. Yet my American side believed that hard work and good intentions could change history, eradicate corruption, pave the way for democracy, create a rule of law, even in Mexico. Mexico somehow always reeled me back. It gave me a sense of purpose. Just setting foot in Mexico made me happy, even though who I am and what I represent, the native and the outsider, is often met with as much rejection in Mexico as it is in the United States. I had spent years trying to shake the feeling that I was hopelessly American in Mexico and Mexican in America. Never fully American, never fully Mexican. Often feeling less than one, sometimes more than two, depending on the moment. Again, I asked my mother, "Usted no cree en las posibilidades? You really don't believe in the possibilities?" If I did, she asked, do you think we would be living here? And just to finish it off, I mean, one of the things that I try to do with the book was to, more than anything, I mean, it also helped me, in a sense, it was therapy, not just to kind of deal with what was happening in Mexico, but also of trying to find my own identity, trying to find out who I am. I mean, a person, and again, sometimes people say, you know, this is a memoir, and I always tell people it's not a memoir because I think this is a story of millions of people, and millions of people living in the United States who are always constantly trying to find out where home is. So I'm in kind of towards the last part of the book, and I'm still struggling with that, you know, question. Eres de aquí, eres de allá. You guys have heard the song that Facundo Cabral, no soy de aquí ni soy de allá, La India Maria. But for me, it always did make sense. I mean, because I am from here and I am from there. And it was, again, one of those barbecues at our home in El Paso. When I'm there and I'm trying to say, okay, I'm almost done with this book, and I have yet to find my sense of peace. I remember this, we were listening to the song Luna, and and on the border it's August and it's raining, which doesn't really rain that much in El Paso, but it suddenly just started raining, and suddenly it just kind of came to me, and I thought, this is what I'm looking for. Suddenly lightning flash, and the thunder boom louder. The skies open wider, and the rains turn ferocious, pelting everyone, forcing us to scramble for temporary shelter underneath the roof of the patio. The rain poured, and it kept pouring. So as Luna erupted, Silencio, the lyrics sweeping me away, the tide rising to the rhythm of a volcano. I always tell people what helped me through this book was really the music, listening to music, and the tequila, drinking a lot of tequila. It was, in my opinion, a perfect afternoon. I stared into the distance. We are the same geography, one blood, two countries, dancing out of steps, two souls still clashing. My feet were planted on U.S. soil. Mexico was in my sights. I did not want to be anywhere else, or anyone else, anywhere else or anyone else. At least at that moment, in my search for home, I felt I didn't have to choose anymore. And when I wrote that, I kind of looked around and I smiled, and all my brothers are looking at me. Said, "What's wrong? What's so funny?" I said, "I found the end." This is not the end of the book, by the way, but it took me there. It took me to where I wanted to be. I'll just say one last thing. This is the paperback version. It came out in June of this year, and it includes an epilogue that instead of reading, I'd rather just tell you about it. And I think it'll explain why we do what we do as journalists. I mean, why do we take the risks we take, especially journalists with more protection, you know, as in my case. Some people ask me, you know, do you have a death wish? And I always tell people, I no color, no story is worth anyone's life. But I think if you live in a country like Mexico where you have more protection, where you can, when I can write a story and call my boss in Dallas and say, you know what, I need to leave, and you can get on a plane, the danger we face really pales in comparison to what our colleagues in Mexico face. And that really hit home in July of 2013 when I was at a restaurant in Polanco with the publisher of Medianoche in Mexico. We were ironing out the last details of the book in Spanish, and my phone kept ringing and ringing and ringing. And I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to pick up the call in the middle of lunch. I finally said, you know what, I need to excuse myself, go to the bathroom. I looked at my cell phone, and there's a text from a source in the United States who says, Carnal, 40 has been captured, confirmed. This is 40, this is the guy, the leader of the Zetas, the guy who just by looking at people would scare the heck out of people. This is a guy who was responsible for a lot of the violence that we saw in 2000s, the videos, the YouTubes with, you know, bodies hanging and so forth. A guy who traveled with millions of dollars on him to bribe people, and always had security around him, cops, other hitmen, etc. This was also the guy who had put a hit on my source, and the guy who sent the message to me. If we can't get the guy, we can't get the source, we'll get the messenger, who was me. So this was a key moment. Calls me up and says, 40's been captured. And I mean, my jaw just dropped, like, wow. And he says he was captured this morning at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., but no one's reporting on this. This is 3:30, almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He says no one is confirming this. I've been refreshing the pages of Reforma, of El Universal. There's nothing. You need to break the story. And I took a long breath, you know, do I really want to break the story and rattle this man again? And I would just kind of, you know, say, well, there's no confirmation. He says, I just sent you confirmation. So I shut down the phone. He said, it's on your BlackBerry. Open the BlackBerry, and there's a picture of 40 with Marines. And I'm trying to find excuses of, you know, why I can't write the story. And I call him back. I said, well, who else knows? He says, the Mexican government knows, U.S. officials know, but no one's reporting this. Call Angela. I said, Angela, we got this big story. I always get Angela involved. I said, we have this big story. Can you help me confirm it? I talked to her 10 minutes later. She says, yeah, I've talked to some sources. Yeah, it's confirmed. I talked to my own sources on both sides of the border. Yes, it's confirmed. I called the Mexican government. We have no idea what you're talking about. No hay confirmación, nothing. Called my editor. I said, I think we have a huge story, but we have no one on the record. We have people on background, people we can say U.S. officials or officials on both sides of the border. And he said, I think it's a hell of a story. Do you feel confident? And I said, I feel confident about it. He says, you got 25 years as a journalist. You have your credibility is at stake. You want to do this? And I said, I did, because in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, and I called my source again. I said, who else knows about it? He says, we've tipped off some Mexican journalists about it, but nobody's writing about it. So your mind is racing, and this is a cab ride from Polanco La Condesa. And normally it's about a 15-minute cab ride. And now it's taking forever, and it's rush hour. Traffic in Mexico City, it's horrendous. And I said, I think we should do the story. Because for me at that moment was, if we don't report on this story, if we don't write the story, this guy can go free. And if we confirm the story, maybe this is a way to do something. So typed the story up, 2 paragraphs on the BlackBerry. I think it was 2 or 3 paragraphs. Sent it off, and the story just went viral. All of a sudden, everybody was covering it. All of a sudden, I get a call from the Mexican government that says, there's a press conference in about an hour. I say, there's about 40 being captured. We can't tell you, but you should be here. And suddenly, it was confirmed. That night, after a very, very long day, I get a tweet from one woman in Mexico who said, esta noche moviste a Mexico. This night, you have moved Mexico. And to me, the message was really underscored. That oftentimes, if you have the protection, truth is our best defense. Truth is really our best weapon in journalism. And this is why we tell stories. This is why we do storytelling. So why don't I leave it at that, and then, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask a couple of quick questions to Alfredo, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for dialogue. And my first question is, first of all, very powerful sharing and reading. And
How did it go? Because this is the first time I do readings. I usually do. I feel naked without my speech.
Okay.
¿Todo bien?
Sí.
Sí.
Sí, sí. And for me, I felt like a number of the aspects that moved me in the book is that, and I think your comments encapsulated this, is I saw this as 4 major sources of love in your life. Love of family, it's dedicated to your parents. There's a beautiful moment in the book where Vicente Fox has won the election, and he's overturned 70 years plus of the PRI being in power. And he made a promise to Alfredo that he would give him the first interview. So he gives Alfredo the first interview, and Alfredo talks about any time you have a big exclusive, you call the newspaper, you start fighting with your editor for space, but this time he called his parents and said, do you know that your son just got the first interview? So there's that love of family. You have a sister who dies real young. You feel that love there. There's the love of reporting. Alfredo mentions in the book that this book is not a history, but it's a compilation of his experiences, and there are hundreds of notebooks from 1986 to 2012 that he kept and used as the basis for the reporting. So it's just drenched in love of reporting. There's the love of Mexico, which you can really hear in the comments, and then there's the love for Angela. And so these 4 sources of love also, as I read it, are sources of conflict. Because at the beginning, Angela's saying, get the hell out. Why are you staying? And your family's saying different things. So if you could just talk about, is that true, what I'm sort of feeling, and then love and conflict in the book and in your life?
Yeah, this mic's not even on, right? So okay. But you guys can hear me. Absolutely. I mean, it's all these loves. But I would also add one more love. I think it's also the love for the United States. And I think when I say you don't have to choose anymore, I think that's a huge relief, that you're constantly trapped between these 2 countries, and suddenly you feel like, okay, I'm as American, and, like I said in the story, I mean, I feel much more American in Mexico and much more Mexican in the United States. And I think it was finding that sense of love that really helped me a lot. When I did tell my mother that I was writing a book, she said, "Que bien! Now you can make the most of your notepads." I said, "What do you mean notepads?" He goes, "I've kept your notepad since you were in community college," and so she had these boxes that were just sitting there, and I always wondered what are all these boxes for, And every time we had a big rainstorm in El Paso, she was always worried that the boxes would get wet. But those were my notepads. I think the other love was really about music. I mean, I originally wanted to be a songwriter, when I worked in the fields in California. And I thought, Juan Gabriel should not be the only one writing songs. I should write my own songs. So that in these notepads, it's funny, when I started reading the notepads, you can see my chicken scratch, my notes and so forth. And then there were also some lyrics, some songs that I would write. Because I would go to Juarez after Freddy's, and we were recording some songs. So it's I mean, I think that's what the book kind of brought me. Again, when I say therapy, it's therapy in very different ways. I should also say that I should say one last story about the kind of updates on the characters. I mean, one of the things I try to do in the book was share a lot of the stories with a lot of the characters. I think all of the characters, the people who are alive, to make sure not only of accuracy, but also to make sure that their safety was not compromised, that they felt comfortable. And I even had an agreement with them. I said, look, if 40 is not captured by February, I think our drop dead, I shouldn't even use that word, drop dead, but our date at Penguin was February 24th of that year. I said, if he's not captured by the 20th, I think it was the 20th, you can opt out. I can take you out of the story. I can take your name or just your story out of the book. And they all said, great. So I based that on sources who said, we're very, very close to 40. We're going to capture him any minute now. And it's like every day, you're waiting for that phone call, and it wasn't happening. But I talked to them. I said, look, 40 is not captured. You can opt out. And they all said, give us 24 hours to think about it, and we'll get back to you. And I get back to the hotel. I was somewhere in Texas. Called my editor that morning, and I said, you know what? We may not have a story, or we might need more time to work on this book. The book was going to come out in June of 2013, the hardback. I said, but just give me a few hours. That next morning, all of them called back and said, will your name still be in the book? Will it still say Midnight in Mexico by Alfredo Corchado? And I go, yes. And they all said, then put my name on it. And to me, that was a huge, huge sign that people wanted their story told, and that people wanted to make sure that the deaths, the kidnappings of more than 100,000 people, or the disappearance of more than 100,000 people was not forgotten. And that was a huge motivation. What's funny today is that I took a lot of care of these sources, to try to make sure they were safe. The rights to the movie have been purchased by Canana, a company owned by Diego Luna, Gael Garcia Bernal, and Pablo Cruz. And what's disturbing and somewhat comical is how all of these sources now insist that they have to be in the movie script. And I say, there's some other stories that you don't even know yet. I need to tell you. I said, no, you know what? But it's I don't know what it is. So that I've been trying to take care of them, and suddenly that happened.
So no, that's and the movie is going to be coming out, so that's very exciting. And we can do it around the movie. My second question, and Susie and I were talking a little bit about this, and just thinking about the event, is there is a heavy theme of violence in the book. Even in the very last sentence, it refers to the killings. Four words, very powerful. And we were talking about how you've just traveled and reported so widely, and just wondered if you had any thoughts about the violence on the border, violence in Mexico, violence here in Chicago, just sort of your vantage point on violence and what you see, what it does to communities, what it's done for you as a reporter, what the impact has been. So just a bit about violence and connection to Chicago, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the violence obviously represents the darkest times in Mexico and the most difficult times. Oftentimes, I think Angela, I was lucky that I was able to get away from the border, from Mexico, and I was really away for more than a year and a half at one point, coming back and forth. But I think other colleagues really felt it, like Angela, and when you join us, maybe you can talk about that a little more. But I think the violence at one point really made me believe that my time as a journalist was over. That I really wanted to cover something else, like maybe the Dallas Cowboys, or cover culture, or something else for the Dallas Morning News. But I also think that the violence also helped me personally as a reporter, to also see the best of Mexicans. And I think you saw it when people were at their worst. And I mean, I'll tell you one story. This is the story of Villa Salvarcar. This is a neighborhood in Ciudad Juarez where a lot of the students, mostly athletes, had been celebrating that day. This is January 30th, I think, of 2010, ¿verdad? 2010. Had been celebrating, had just won a big championship. And there was also a birthday for one of the players. So outside this house, they had Campeones AAA, champions AAA. The cartels, one rival group was looking for another rival group. And the guys they were looking for was el doble A, artistas asesinos. They had the wrong information, the wrong tip. They showed up at the birthday party. They walked in, and this is still on some transcripts. Well, they walked in and said, they called the main boss and said, you know what, I think we have the wrong house. And the orders from the boss was, kill them all. You know, o sea, dales piso. And they started just just shooting at everybody. More than 30 people were shot, wounded. 15 of them were killed, mostly students. And I remember this was like the defining moment in Mexico. This was like the parteaguas. ¿Cómo se dice parteaguas en inglés?
Parting of the waters.
The parting of the waters. I mean, this was really the key moment, a watershed moment in Mexico. Because people started questioning, what is Calderón doing? What is the war about? What is this war about? Why are so many innocent people dying? I happened to be in El Paso that day. Angela and I drove back to Ciudad Juarez within, I guess, an hour or so after we got the news. And I mean, this was the worst moment. I remember the day of the funeral. There were all these hearses parked in the same on the street, because a lot of the kids lived in the same street. So you're reporting. There are 5, 6, 7 hearses parked, and it's raining and raining. And I remember I kept thinking, I'm so glad that it's raining, because not one reporter could really contain the tears. I mean, you can just talk to one another. You can see everybody had tears in their eyes. It was the worst moment in Mexico that I had seen, the violence that had erupted. And yet, a day later, some of these families went to El Paso, crossed the border, and called me and said, we're here in the United States looking for we're looking for asylum, political asylum. Can you help us? And I said, well, I'm just a reporter. The only thing I can do is maybe give you a ride to a lawyer, but I can't advise you. I can't help you. The lawyer talks to them and says, this is what's gonna happen if you decide to seek political asylum. A, you're gonna have to leave Mexico for a long time. You will not be able to be in Mexico. And one after another, all the parents decided they didn't want political asylum. They wanted to stay in Ciudad Juarez and make something out of this incredible tragedy. And they rose up and they started building community. And it's something that I think for me, and maybe Angela and others, this was also one of the best moments in Mexico. And you see that in communities, whether it's Nuevo Laredo, whether it's Monterrey, whether it's Coahuila, small pockets of people who get together and they're trying to build community. And I always say, what's your message for the United States? And so look, the Americans will do whatever they want, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Dallas, they're gonna do whatever they want, whenever they decide. But as Mexicans, it's not just about blaming people anymore. It's about shaming them, and it's about taking, our own responsibility. And I think that's really something that always you understand where Mexico is. I mean, I think it took a lot of I think it took the violence to force a lot of Mexico's middle class and high-end class to leave Mexico and to move to the United States, places like Chicago, places like Dallas, places like Houston. And it started a real debate. I mean, you know, these days I'm writing stories for the Dallas Morning News. It's no longer just about violence, but it's about the high-end migration, the big money people who now live in Dallas, who live in San Antonio, San Diego, et cetera. So it's something that I think has sparked a lot of internal debate and about Mexico's future, but also what Mexico has to do to try to get there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And at this point, we would just love to turn over to the audience. If you can,
Angela, why don't you come over here?
yeah, and I was going to say, Angela, do you want to come up, please? Can we give Angela a round of applause? Please encourage her to join us. And yeah, and we do have CAN TV here filming us, so we really appreciate that.
Can we sit here, or
Is that okay, guys?
you want us to take
Which
this?
would you prefer?
Okay, we'll stay here. She's got that doubt in her mind.
Yeah.
I understand.
So, questions, comments, dialogue. Who would like to say, and then we'll of course hear from Angela on that too. Yeah.
I just want to ask, there's a real trend now, as you said, all those bureaus closed down to the Dallas Morning News. So many papers don't have bureaus, so the trend is really to let freelancers cover, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Mexico, these incredibly violent situations.
Right.
I would love you to talk a little bit about that, and what you think of that, newspapers doing that, and what you think as well are some of the recourses for these people. I mean, there are a lot of students here who have said, this is the desire they have to go to the war zone. Some who even go to the war zones within Chicago where there's so much violence. So maybe tips about things like that, covering it.
You want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
I mean, it didn't just go from 13 people bureau to a one person, but also these days we're the only bureau covering Mexico in the Southwest. I think the only other bureau there is the LA Times. So it's just us, and that's I mean it's obviously it's a tragedy. We have a routine in Mexico City. It's called La Cantina, which is every Friday night the foreign correspondents get together, and we're always. I think that's one reason why we drink more, because we look around and we do see a lot of freelancers. I mean, you don't see the correspondents from the San Antonio Express News or the Houston Chronicle. I think at one point we had the New Orleans ticket. Yeah, I mean, all those people are gone. The incident, the Global Post incident in the Middle East, it really sparked a big debate among the correspondents about insurance. It's interesting. A lot of these freelancers, I mean, I whenever we talk to them, I mean, they're doing surprisingly well, because we're always getting more and more freelancers who are coming in, and they say, look, we find that there's still a market, but it's really the lack of protection that I think worries a lot of correspondents, worries a lot of us, that these people they're very vulnerable. They don't have the experience. They don't have a mothership backing them up. When you have some of these big stories erupt, and we're always worried that that cartels in Mexico will get ideas from the Middle East, and I mean because we saw that in early 2000s when some of the beheadings. There's actually some people in UNAM who have been working on a study looking at the connection between the what was our colleague from the Wall Street Journal? I apologize. Daniel Pearl. That after the Daniel Pearl incident, we started seeing some of that in Mexico, and we don't really expect that to happen with foreign correspondents, because I think I want to think that cartels will think twice about trying to go after a foreigner. It's not like the Middle East where they're political commodities. That in Mexico, Latin America, it's much more of a headache. I mean, you're basically threatening a $40 billion annual industry, but it's still, that concern is still there. But what happens to freelancers?
I would just say that, and I don't think we need this, I would just say the other big concern, there are entire areas of Mexico where you have these zones of silence where you can't do reporting, whether you're a U.S. freelancer or a Mexican journalist, because it's so dangerous, like in Tamaulipas. And so that's of concern. And we see social media stepping in, people trying to, citizen journalists trying to document what's happening at great risk to themselves. We've had bloggers killed and made examples of. So it's really hard for people to know what's happening in Mexico, and that's why you need to try and go and actually document, not just rely on some of the social media. And you also see cartels effectively using media to terrorize communities and threaten not just their rivals, but average citizens and journalists. So I think that's a huge concern. But we need more and more journalists in Latin America and in Mexico. I disagree a little with Alfredo about foreign correspondents or U.S. even freelancers having more safety, because yes, if there's a big cartel boss making these business-minded decisions, great, but it could also be a 14-year-old with a gun who sees you walking down the street and considers you a threat. So it's hard to be that confident.
Thank you. Other questions, comments, Teresa? And then, no, go ahead. And can you just say your name and introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. My name is Victoria Salinas. In your book, you mentioned this man who you, I guess, interviewed at a funeral, and you said that they were building a community out of his son's blood.
Right.
What organization? You said they, I guess, started something like a nonprofit there in the community. I just wanted to know more about that.
What's the name of the group? We were just talking about this morning.
Because it wasn't in the book.
Villas Albarca. It's an organization. In fact, we've been following them up because we've been doing stories. They're organizing young kids through football. ¿Cómo se llama el grupo?
Well, it was kind of an informal parents group, and then they've turned into more of a, there's different team sports, but also they have to stay in school. But we can get you the name. It was very loose-knit kind of nonprofit. Now they're trying to become more formalized.
In fact, I'll tell you, it's kind of a funny story, but when I started doing the book talks, people would always ask, what can we do as Americans? What can we do? And as a journalist, you don't cross the line. And at one point, I was so frustrated. I went back to El Paso, and I told my sisters, I said, people want to know what can we do. And my sister, much younger, much more idealistic, a lawyer, said, why don't we start a nonprofit? And we started a group called Somos through the El Paso Community Foundation. And we said, okay, it'll be, and she's got the whole guidelines. If you're interested, I can send you the whole guidelines and all that. But the idea was to help students who were impacted by violence along the Texas border. Because I think more than anything, what Mexicans need, especially young Mexicans, they need a sense of hope. And so we started Somos, and bam, right away we had 2 kids apply, for it. And we thought, okay, well, this is going to take a while. I think we had just done the first fundraiser, so we didn't have the money. And this kid gets in. I mean, this is Raul Para, who I'm going to see him on Friday, but he was a quarterback for the team. And he was there when his classmates were shot. In fact, he drove to the hospital with 2 of them, and both ended up dying. But Raul promised them that that one day he would win the championship for them. And while he was at the hospital, this is a kid who wanted to become a customs broker, do something else in life. While he was at the hospital, he decided he wanted to become a nurse because he wanted to save people's lives. So it tells us the whole story, and I finally just started pulling money through friends. I said, look, we got to help this kid. So he is the first recipient of the Somos project, and he is now at UTEP. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary, so I'm going to see him on Friday and try to see how it's going. But I'd be happy to share with you the information about this group.
Scholarships, and he left just hanging when he said he was a high school dropout. He did go on to community college and UT El Paso, and that's his own.
Yeah, and I think of
for those of you who didn't read the book.
That's right.
So do stay in school.
Yeah. Teresa, do you want to ask?
I think a lot of us saw the headlines the other day of this mass grave found in Guerrero. And so
I almost canceled my trip to Chicago.
Another terrible story. So many mass graves. So your book ends before Peña Nieto. So I was wondering if you had any reflections on,
It ends actually with Peña Nieto.
or with, well, yeah, but what are your reflections on, has anything changed? What's changed with the new president? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better?
I don't know that it's getting worse. I mean, I have real conflicting feelings about it, because I think when Peña Nieto came in, it was very clear that he wanted to change the narrative, and he wanted people outside of Mexico to see a different Mexico, and you get that. I mean, you understand what he's trying to do, and they were very, very good. I mean, they were very crafty. I think within 48 hours after he won, we had a call from Peña Nieto's office saying, "Would you like to interview the president or the president-elect?" And I mean, you know, we had a good relationship with Vicente Fox, because I knew Fox for many years. Felipe Calderón was terrible. The relationship with him was terrible. I think the relationship with all the correspondents was terrible. Reporters in general was terrible. But this guy calls up and says, you know, we'd like to meet with the press. And we said, sure, you know, we'll meet. We went and we came in, and the press guy said, you have 20 minutes to ask him all the questions. So I told Angela. Angela joined me. I said, okay, we got 20 minutes. We got to do our questions, blah, blah. After 20 minutes, the guy's, you know, looking at, you know, the ate. It's like, ya córtale, ya estuvo. And Peña Nieto, and this is where the Gaviota story comes in. Peña Nieto gets up and says, but why are you leaving? I don't even know who you guys are. You know, cuéntenme su historia. And it was interesting, I mean, that the charm, the PRI was back. You know, the messengers was back. And he asked me, he said, so what are you? Are you Mexican? Are you American? ¿Qué no? And I said, no, soy mexicano. Mi familia es de Durango, blah, blah. He said, did your family vote for me? And I said, you know what? If they did, it was for La Gaviota. It wasn't because of you, and so forth. But right away, you did see a different narrative, and I think you know, there's parts of you that see that there is another Mexico. There is a more prosperous Mexico, in parts. You know, El Bajío, Guanajuato, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí. But I think what you see in Guerrero, what you've seen in the Estado de Mexico, is also a sign that he's trying to build a country on quicksand. They're not as focused on rule of law. I mean, say what you want about Calderón or Fox, but I think at least it was out in the open. That you know, that they said, look, this is what we're facing. And even if you talk to reporters today, they will tell you, yes, there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of back then, but also there was a sense of a more freedom for certain reporters. These days, I think there's a lot of concern that that the advertising dollars are again holding a lot of reporters hostage. That it's not just the narcos, but it's also the dollars that go into, you know, from government advertising. There are places like Ciudad Juárez that I think have become better. Nuevo Laredo, I think it's somewhat better, although we don't really know because we're really not reporting out of there. Michoacán, I think is one of the hot button states. Jalisco, just when I left, I think I read that something like 68 cops have been killed in the last few months. A senator was picked up on the highway, taken, killed, and so all these are signs that that yes, you can try to change the narrative. But I think you also have to try to find a balance, the other side. And to this date, Peña Nieto, his team, they don't really want to talk about that. They don't really want to talk about the violence. But I think with the midterm elections coming next year, it's an issue that's not going to go away. His ratings are really poor. I think it's the worst ratings for any modern president today.
Yes, sir.
One question real quick is, when you would find yourself writing a book, were you writing in English or Spanish? Or did you find yourself being able to communicate maybe deeper in one of the two languages?
I was writing in Spanglish. And I really found that that's really my natural language, that I think in both languages. And I was also writing with a lot of Juan Gabriel. And I don't mean that as a joke. But there was something about whenever Juan Gabriel would play, it was two things. Juan Gabriel, Así Fue, that song, I think at one point, I had a personal editor who was helping me. I mean, I had the editor back in New York City, but I think the personal editor in Mexico City was even much more instrumental in getting me. And she would always try to help me find my space, you know, as a writer, find my voice. But sometimes when she knew that Juan Gabriel was playing for 5, 6, 7 times, she would say, "Sabes qué, ya me voy. You're in your zone." But that was, I think the first draft I sent to New York, there was a lot more Spanish. And she would come back. And to their credit, they didn't really change that much on the Spanish stuff. I mean, a lot of it they left because, as the editor said, you know, I think this is kind of the future language. It's not Spanish, it's not English, it's Spanglish. So they respected that.
And then just sort of touching back on sort of this Mexico now, I guess. So, you know, when Peña Nieto came in, there was this at least from this side of the border, this idea that he was elected mostly because of his wife, the popularity of his wife, this actress. He's not a very good English-speaking president.
Yeah, I think he's better than people think he is. I've heard him in English, and I thought, wow, not bad.
So I mean, that's part of it. I wonder how much of it. It felt a lot like he was another puppet, sort of this bigger umbrella. But it also feels like he is making changes in the culture, in terms of the media, sort of some regulations of the media, in terms of the education policies, some huge changes in education. That obviously there's a lot of teacher protests in the past couple of years. Do you think that changing culture sort of also needs to happen? The accountability in the culture itself, in the Mexican, not only putting the weight on the government, but also taking accountability as a culture. I grew up in Mexico, so I feel that the culture itself has this idea of, I need to get mine, you know, and there's this sense of corruption that you kind of grow up with, not trying to harm other people, but also trying to get to the front of the line at whatever means possible. So do you think that culture itself is changing, that the younger people are changing that?
I mean, I think, at least in the time I've been in Mexico, the 20 years, I mean, I do see a much more open, much more global society. And I think that's changing whether it's Peña Nieto or not. I don't know how much Peña Nieto is really impacting that. I think society in general is changing. Sometimes too slowly, very slow, but I think it is a very different society. I sometimes wonder, you know, if Peña Nieto put the same focus on corruption and accountability that he put in the other reforms. I think something like 14, 16 reforms that they passed. Incredible reforms, very, very, I think a lot of them are very good reforms that a lot of people applaud him for. But you have to wait to see if it's implemented correctly. I mean, for example, in I think the energy sector, there's one report that says, you know, 300,000 new jobs will be created if done right. And you saw the machine go out, you know, to pass energy reform. Sometimes I wonder, why don't they do the same thing for la reforma de la contabilidad or something, you know, something that talks about the corruption in Mexico? Because I think that's really, that continues to be the main threat to Mexico's prosperity. I was out in Querétaro, which is kind of the model for Mexico, the aerospace industry, the auto plants and so forth. But when you talk to people off the record on background, they will tell you their number one issue still is security or lack of security. I mean, there's still a lot of concerns about security. And I kind of feel at times that this is going to explode at some point. I don't know if you saw the El Grito, you know, 15th of September, but I've never seen a more miserable couple like Peña Nieto and Gaviota. I mean, there's something, I don't know yet. I mean, you know, as a reporter, you kind of smell that something's about to erupt, and you kind of wonder, Gaviota has a hell of a book, you know. At some point, she's going to write a hell of a book. But there, I think there is something. I mean, the thing you talk about, the puppet, something that, you know, is constantly being debated in Mexico. Is this a Televisa marriage? Right. You know, and it's something that when I talk to American officials, that's one of the first things they ask me is, what about the marriage? What's going on? So you know that they're also thinking about the same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
My comment is, I want to thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
There's no secret, there's very few journalists of color, and there's even fewer journalists who want to cover their communities. My brother's in the industry as well, and he's the reason I want to do what I want to do. And I've told him, I want to go to Mexico, I want to go to Cuba, I want to cover all of these places, these stories need to be told. And
Great.
excuse my French, but he said, stay your ass in the States. He's like, let them solve their problems, let their reporters do it. And that really didn't settle well with me. So the fact that, you even went against your parents' wishes by going back and doing that, it's just so important. And I know so many people are thankful that you were doing that. And then my question is actually for Angela. He said that you spent some time in Juarez, which obviously as many people know is where the femicides took place. Not just as a woman staying there, but as a woman reporter. I would love to know about your experience there, and that, of course, your loved one is staying in Juarez, and so how you felt about that as well.
Yeah, no, that's a long-standing story, all the disappearances of the women. I just did an update, in fact, a couple weeks ago. A special prosecutor had to be created because some of the mothers of the murdered women took this all the way to the International Court of Human Rights, and Mexico was ordered to do something to respond. So the special prosecutor's only been around, 2 years, so we're trying to figure out exactly what is it working. There's a lot more attention. There's some debate, mixed reviews about it's very small staff. There is more people coming forward. They are catching more and prosecuting more of the crimes, which is kind of gets back to your question. I don't know that I think that there's a culture of corruption in Mexico. There obviously is a lot of corruption. But I think, especially on the border, we see the same families, the same people living on both sides, and suddenly, I asked a police chief in Juarez, who was kind of notorious, what is it going to take to have law and order in Juarez? He said, probably it'll cost, I thought he was going to have this huge budget, he said it'll cost about maybe $2. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, when people cross the bridge, they put their seatbelt on, they obey the laws, and I think it's the institutions of rule of law. And that's why there's so many women in Juarez. We will never probably know how many were murdered, and even the young people who've disappeared, because there isn't an investigation, there isn't a prosecution, there isn't a court of law that will investigate and look for real evidence. We're seeing some progress, but the thing that gives me hope is that there are still these mothers and the wives and the other family members fighting for justice and not going to let this go, and they're not going to forget their murdered loved ones. There are still young women disappearing, and it's a huge concern, but there is more of an effort to go after those crimes. As far as women journalists, Teresa knows she put together a conference. A lot of the women covering the violence day in and day out in Juarez were women. A lot of the journalists were women. The war came to us, and so we covered it day in and day out, and I think it kind of gave it a different tone. It wasn't just which narco guy was, in charge today. We also looked at the impact on families, on businesses, on everyday life, on education, on children. So, but a lot of brave women, a lot of colleagues in Mexico doing very, very difficult work.
Yeah, Susie?
Could I ask you if you could follow up a little bit with talking about how the Mexican reporters and the press corps there, what they face and where they, just looking at it. Yes.
Well, this is a plug, a shameless plug. Next week we have a conference in Mexico City. It's the National Association of Hispanic Journalists will be holding. It's not the first because we had one in 2000, right? 2000 with Ricardo Sandoval was there. But this will be the first in modern day with all the violence that's been going on, and it's an opportunity for Mexican American journalists, Hispanic journalists, to try to show solidarity with our colleagues in Mexico. There's a huge difference. As Angela was saying, there are regions in Mexico where the word is say nothing, know nothing, see nothing, because it's zones of silence, and oftentimes. You talk about the challenges they face, but you also talk about groups that have been formed, like Periodistas de a Pie, which is a group in Mexico City, that's helping journalists, train them, teach them about ethics, teach them about. It's sad to say, but there's also a lot of collusion that goes on between reporters and corrupt authorities or cartels. In certain regions, like big story just broke in Michoacan, where you had the reporters were in the pockets of some of these self-defense groups. So I mean, there's a lot of challenges. But I always tell people, I mean, yes, I'm Mexican. Yes, I was born in Mexico. But it really pales in comparison to the dangers that Angela and I face, you know, compared to the dangers that they face, that our colleagues in Mexico face. I mean, they're in the same community. You know, they report on something. It's not just their lives at stake, but also their families' lives are at stake. So it's a very, very different situation. You want to?
Yeah, and I would just add, a lot of the news organizations in Mexico do very little, if anything, to protect their journalists, and that's a huge concern. The journalists who are trying to help each other come up with, you know, just ways to stay safe in the field in Mexico, the journalists themselves, and so that's a huge concern.
There's no health insurance. There's no what do you call it? The life. I mean, sometimes you talk to colleagues, and they're on their own. I mean, you know, that it takes a lot of bravery, a lot of courage to do what they do, because I think oftentimes the editors would rather look the other way or not even know about not know about the dangers they face.
So next week are you bringing a lot of those journalists in as well?
Yes, it'll be a regional conference, association members, but we're bringing in people from the countryside who will be coming to Mexico City through Periodistas de a Pie, which is an organization out of there. So yes, there'll be journalists coming in, and there'll be workshops on ethics, on safety, protecting your sources, protecting yourself, that kind of stuff. And Angela, you're on the first panel, I think, right? Yeah.
Gentleman at the back, yes, sir.
Alejandro. I've known Alfredo for a long time, and you know, I would like you to ask you to talk about the impact of drug trafficking on this side of the border. And I'm gonna tell you a story. I was writing for the Sun-Times, and I went to a high school outside of Chicago. Parents were very concerned about their kids, you know, doing drugs and all that. And one of the students stood up and said to the parents and the police was there, give me a cell phone, and in 30 minutes, I can get to this high school any drug that I want. 30 minutes. And that kept me thinking, if I try to get your book through Amazon, that will take a day, okay? The drug cartels in Mexico are such a powerful organizations that they can deliver to you, to your house, anything you want in less than 30 hours. I mean, in less than 30 minutes. For that to happen is such a logistical operation. It takes distribution, it takes transportation.
They're better than FedEx.
Better than FedEx. As a matter of fact, an MIT professor said that if the cartel of Sinaloa was a company, it would be worth more than Apple. Now, for that to happen, who does the business on this side? Who are the capos? Who takes care of distribution? What are the banks that allow that? And what is the impact in our cities and communities? Here in Chicago, we see it every day.
We did a story, I think it was 2-3 years ago in the morning news. Look, it was called The Path of Destruction. And it was a story following the drugs from Cucuta, Colombia, to Central America, Mexico, the Gulf states, and then onto I-35, Houston, I mean not Houston, but San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas. And it was interesting to just see what that impact, I mean, as you go through this region, you know, the violence that erupted, the lives that are lost, people who leave Central America, who leave Mexico, and so forth. And then you get to the United States, and it's a much more orderly process. You know, you don't have the beheadings on I-35, the hangings and so forth. I mean, you have rule of law. That's I think the question we get the most from our colleagues in Mexico is why don't you cover that issue in the United States? And we do. I mean, I think at the Dallas Morning News we've done a lot more of that because we've seen the impact that much closer. We just had a story a few weeks ago about an attorney, a Mexican attorney who was killed in South Lake. And when the story first broke, it was about a year and a half ago. Right away we were told it was U.S. I mean, it was a Mexican cartel tied into the Beltran Leyva organization, who ordered the killing, and it was done through the Zetas in the Dallas area. But it was amazing when we looked at the documents. The documents was just released about 3 weeks ago, and the details. I mean, how the cartel members had hired 3 cops from San Pedro, ¿cómo se llama? San Pedro Garza, in Monterrey, which is, as you know, it's one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Mexico. But it was a father, a son, and a friend, all cops, who came in to Dallas, scoped this guy out, put very sophisticated devices in his vehicle. They tracked him for weeks, if not months, the cell phone and everything, and they were able to do this hit. But that, I think, was able to help us put a name in the face. The same thing with the Trevino Morales family, when we were covering the racehorses and the trial, and the people who were on these documents. I mean, very high-profile businessmen from the Austin, San Antonio area, and their ties to cartels. I mean, I'm always surprised when people say, "You mean they're really here?" They're really here in Chicago. They're really here in Dallas. Of course they're here, but it's different rules. I mean, different rules apply, and I think when I was talking to Jeff earlier, I mean, I think that's one of the encouraging things that I see from Mexicans is that they understand that. They understand that at the United States, even if they legalize the drugs tomorrow, that somehow the Mexican cartels will find a way to make money, whether it's through extortions or kidnappings or the unaccompanied children. I mean, I did a story about a month ago on how in South Texas, or it was a South in Tamaulipas, Reynosa, Matamoros, they were making more money from children than they were from cocaine proceeds, because they will go after whatever will generate money at the time. You want to add?
Okay, why don't we get one more question and then a chance if folks want to come up and chat a little bit with Alfredo and Angela. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Have you ever covered any stories about, I guess, like money laundering and like the agricultural business? Because my father's in the agricultural business in Mexico, and he's always like telling me stories of people telling him. No, he's actually, he's in Mexico City, but he works in Puebla, but he knows a lot of truck drivers to go to the border, obviously, because they work for him. But I mean, I'm always dumbfounded on how he tells me these stories like so casually, like they're real, but like I've never met anyone who's covered those kinds of stories.
I mean, I haven't covered the agricultural story, but I have read stories from Rio Doce in Sinaloa. I mean, this is an example of a paper that does a lot of really hard-hitting work in the Sinaloa region, and some of the stuff they did was on agriculture and how they were taking advantage of that program, Procampo. The narcos themselves, were asking for Procampo funds.
And it's just also too, I wanted to comment, because my family is just in that the importing and exporting business. And my mom also too, she mentions to me how, like, people that she works with, just like call from the border, like people in McAllen, like they're like, hey, I'm bringing so-and-so product, I'm bringing limes now, like people that they just appeared out of nowhere, but they have all this money, and then like they come to like, whatever, to the East Coast, Midwest, and they deliver like this merchandise that doesn't, like, it's money laundering, because it's like, it's fruits and vegetables that can no sirven, they don't work, and it's just like, that's just something to that.
Well, when I met Paisana, and I was her waiter, she was carrying Malbec wine, and then as a clumsy waiter, I knocked the bottle, and there was these packets of cocaine, but I mean, it's very, very creative. When I met her, I said, "Didn't you also like wine?" But I think the informant-reporter relationship is like almost the less you know about one another, the better.
No, I just think that are you going to be a journalist?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's a good story. But be very careful. But yeah, very important stories.
No son tan tímidos, more.
I have a question for Angela.
Por favor.
So one of the things that sort of I loved about the book was sort of this culture, you know, the dual culture, the family, the going back home. How do you come from an immigrant family, from various backgrounds? Do you have the same feelings? Did you ever have those feelings? I mean, how does Mexico feel within you or the U.S.? I mean, what are your feelings in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that brought us together, we both wanted to cover Mexico and go back. I was born in Mexico and spent part of my childhood there, but also in Texas. So I think I probably came to terms with, I don't really fit neatly in any box, you know, and so it's hard for people sometimes to figure out what I am or who I am. Even his first question when he met me was, you know, what are you? I'm a human being. And so, what are you?
That's in the book.
I think that, yeah, I think the more we can, and I meet people every day in my life that kind of don't, especially along the border, don't fit any category. And I think those are the rich people who can build these bridges of understanding. Yeah, there is a lot of conflict in that, and there can be pain and misunderstanding, but I now, as an adult, feel it's the greatest advantage I had growing up, having been a child in Mexico and, you know, speak fluent Spanish, and not just bilingual, but bicultural, and that's why students who try to, you know, for whatever reason, walk away from that, or maybe weren't raised that way, I encourage them to reconnect and to embrace that.
I would tell you that one of the saddest moments I remember, sharing with Angela, was the morning we left Mexico City, and I mean, it's in the book, but it still strikes me. We're leaving the the city, and then you have this incredible full moon, and because it was Mexico that drew us together. It was Angela who really convinced me that Mexico City could be a home, and you know, and as a Durango boy, you know, someone from the countryside, I never saw that, and so driving out that morning, I kept looking at her and just saw the sadness in her eyes, and we still talk about it, about what a sad moment that was, and you know, Angela's holding back, but Mexico City, I think, is still the very, very deep in her heart.
Yeah, and I think we could, well, probably a lot of us always have one foot on each side of the border, and never go back and forth our whole lives.
Well,
You want to leave it on the very sad note?
But it's a beautiful note. It's a beautiful note to leave it about having one foot on both sides, about building bridges, and really just our tremendous gratitude to both of you for coming, to talking with us, to sharing your book. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Co-sponsors, Columbia,
Muchas gracias.
TV, Community Workshop, Chicago Headline Club.